The battle buses are in top gear. The manifestos are fresh off the presses. The UK general election campaign is here. And it is online where the battle is perhaps being hardest fought. And just maybe reshaping democracy as we know it. Welcome to Roundtable. Hello from me, David Foster. The truth is out there, believe it or not, and so are the lies. And believe it or not really is the heart of it all. What can you believe when the masters and the mistresses of manipulation are at work?
Today, social media plays a big role in democracies worldwide. The digital space is increasingly contested as mainstream parties compete with each other for support like never before. Why? Because it allows parties to target voters with tailor-made adverts based on thousands of variables that go beyond just age, gender and location. Ahead of the UK's general election, mainstream parties have spent big sums on targeted online political ads. In the week leading up to November 23rd, the Liberal Democrats spent the most out of mainstream parties, £190,000 on Facebook and Instagram ads. Experts say if the Labour Party continues its current rate of spending, it will have spent £3 million by election day on both platforms. But in this campaign, there have been accusations over online misinformation. The Conservative Party was heavily criticised for misleading the public when its Twitter platform posed as an independent fact-checking service during the recently televised UK leadership debate. And to highlight the potential dangers of technology, one campaign group created fake videos in which Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn endorsed each other.
Only he, not I, can make Britain great again.
Back Boris Johnson to continue as our Prime Minister.
One company, Cambridge Analytica, was exposed in 2018 for harvesting the data of millions of people and using it to create tailored political adverts. That prompted new policies on platforms like Facebook and Twitter. But are we still playing catch-up?
Very pleased to say that joining this roundtable from Cardiff University in Wales, we have Matt Walsh, Senior Lecturer at the School of Journalism, Media and Culture, with me in the studio. Arik Chowdhury, Head of Think Tank at Future Advocacy, behind a video that's been doing the rounds on the election, and Alex Tate, co-founder of the Coalition for Reform in Political Advertising. You all know a great deal about this. I'm going to go to you first of all, Matt, down in Cardiff, because you spent the last couple of years studying it in some detail. Have things changed since 2015 onwards?
Yeah, there's been quite a lot of change, David. What's really happened over the last few years is that Labour got a very good operation together for the 2017 election that was, particularly on Facebook, credited with really extending the reach of the party's organic material that they were putting out on Facebook that was engaging lots of audiences, that tried to motivate younger people and younger voters, tried to get that extra voters out that hadn't really voted for Labour in past elections or drifted away over the last elections, and really engage them again, get them really feeling that there was a great social movement that was being produced under the Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, and that they could be a part of that exciting campaign.
And just to stop you for a second quickly on that point, Matt, I mean, this was targeted at particular groups of people. So how does targeted advertising really work in this case?
So there's two really different approaches to the way you can do advertising on Facebook. There's targeted advertising, where parties decide that they want to try to reach voters in a particular constituency, and they can try to choose certain characteristics with Facebook of those people that they want to target and to reach. And there's organic advertising, which is where the parties put up lots of stuff onto their Facebook pages for their party or for the leaders' accounts, and they allow that material to spread virally. So targeted doesn't spread virally, it just is about reaching particular people in particular constituencies. Organic is about virality, it's about persuading people to share material.
Sorry to be a bit naive here, but they could choose David Foster in the part of the country he lives in, and if they thought it would be a good idea to offer me free beer or free golf, they could be that specific.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, they will get down to that kind of level of granularity at around postcode level with gender and with age, and that may well, if they've chosen the characteristics correctly, target you. They're probably not going for quite that level of granularity, but they are looking at sort of constituency level voting, ward level operations to try to reach people, to try to persuade them that they want to vote for a particular
And
party.
is your point that the others have now caught up on the
Absolutely.
Labour
So what
model?
we're seeing here really is that the Conservatives have raised their game. In 2017, they were very flat-footed. The operation was rather left stuck in the mud. They were operating still in a way where they were focused entirely upon the targeting, and the targeting wasn't as effective as it had been in 2015. And the organic campaign rather lacked dynamism and looked rather boring in comparison to a much more exciting campaign that was being put forward by Labour. This time around, the Conservatives have put a lot more effort into the organic campaign and are looking a lot harder at how they can get people to spread material online, how they can get beyond that hyper-engaged political users who are really interested and really excited by politics out to ordinary people.
All right, Matt, I'll come back.
Use those people to influence others.
Arik, you put together this fake video, which was of Boris Johnson endorsing Jeremy Corbyn and Jeremy Corbyn endorsing Boris Johnson. It was obvious, it was out there for a bit of a laugh and to show that this sort of thing can be done. But the reality is that an awful lot of people are trying to lie to us, and that's one way of doing it, isn't it?
Yeah, so what we produced are what are called deep fakes. So these are essentially manipulated videos of individuals. So in our videos, we, like you said, got Boris Johnson to endorse Jeremy Corbyn and Jeremy Corbyn to endorse Boris Johnson. And within the video, they also warned about the threats of these kinds of technologies. So it's really around raising public awareness, which I think we did quite well.
But my point is, I mean, you know, everybody knows that that's a fake. How easy is it to spot those that are trying to look genuine but are actual lies?
So you look for inaccuracies around the voice, look for inaccuracies around the edge of the subject's face, for example, the lip movements, the number of times they blink.
But we don't have time to do this. This is the point, isn't it? I mean, we are shown something. You either look at it quickly or you read it for about a minute, or you watch 15, 20 seconds. You don't know and you haven't got the time to check.
A lot of advertising works with your subconscious. But one of the themes of this election around lies and around misleading claims essentially needs the very outdated rules around political advertising to be updated and modernised. They haven't changed despite all of the discussion since Brexit and the last general election. One of the key things we're advocating is that the loophole that exists around political advertising, all other advertising in the UK has to be legal, decent, honest and truthful, is closed.
Okay, let me just read you from the Advertising Standards Code.
Sure.
Claims in marketing communication, whenever published or derived, whose principal function is to influence voters, are exempt from the code. In other words, it doesn't apply. They can say what they like.
That's right. And actually, as technology has developed, and deepfakes is something I think we're going to see emerging, you know, probably not in earnest, actually, maybe in the 2020 US election, it's just absolutely essential we modernise our outdated rules around ads. So, in this election so far, we've seen a catalogue of misleading claims.
Well, let's go through some of those in just a moment.
Sure.
But what were you trying to prove with this?
We want to raise awareness. Like you mentioned, we already have had a number of inquiries into fake news and misinformation, and all of those kinds of misleading information we've had online will be trivial compared to video content in the future, which, as you said, will be harder to spot, especially as the technology advances. And naturally, I think we tend to trust what we view with our eyes more than what we read in a news article, because we know that there's an intermediary in between us. Whereas with deepfakes, it's a very visual experience, which will be in my opinion, a lot more difficult to spot and notice.
Is what we're seeing here, in a slightly more sophisticated form, only what has been allowable in the United States for a very long time? I mean, the first TV ad was, 1950-something with Eisenhower, and then we had the Swift boat campaigns denigrating people's military service, etc., etc. Isn't that what we're seeing come over here?
Yeah, I mean, clearly, for a British political audience, UK has kind of imported the worst aspects, in some ways, of American political attack ads and political communication really wholesale, and we're sort of in a situation where the audience is having to learn to deal with this kind of misinformation, or at least propagandistic information, which maybe they haven't done in previous years, where they've had a more reliable advertising environment in which to operate it. So we're starting to see much more in the way of claims which might be mistrusted by an audience, that are open to interpretation, or possibly even downright lies. Now, obviously, we've seen the Keir Starmer video from the interview with Good Morning Britain, which has.
Well, we haven't all necessarily seen that, Matt, because this is going out around the world. So I'm going to let Alex, if you don't mind me interrupting you, Matt, tell us about the Keir Starmer one, for example, and some of the others.
Yeah, we're seeing really an arms race, I think.
Well, tell us about the Keir Starmer one.
Well, the Keir Starmer video is a senior Labour politician that basically had an end of his an interview on a breakfast show, slowed down to look like he didn't know the answer to a question. But we've actually seen...
And it was edited and put out by Conservative Central Office, the inference being, how on earth can you trust this guy who hasn't got a clue what he's saying?
And there's been lots of other examples. There's another one a couple of days ago of another prominent Labour MP, Jess Phillips, just the day after the Labour manifesto launch, where she was effectively talking, I think, a couple of months before that about the problems with manifestos. And so the context was very misleading of it being put out and appearing to relate to her party's manifesto that had just launched. But this isn't a partisan issue. It's not just in the UK, the Conservatives. It's actually, we're documenting through this election misleading claims on our website. And there are examples from right across the spectrum of misleading claims. So actually, on the other side of the political spectrum, the Liberal Democrats have some very good examples of very misleading bar charts they're using in some of their campaign literature, through to mislabelling the sources of some of the data that's being used in their data. They use YouGov, which is a very respective source, instead of another third-party source.
Is there a line that cannot be crossed here? Because the thing that seemed to cause the most outrage was not the Keir Starmer thing. That was obvious. The Conservative Party sort of said, well, look, we've just changed it a little bit. But the one that seemed to cause the most outrage was after the two leaders' debate, Johnson-Corbyn debate, during which Conservative Central Office, if you like, changed one of its Twitter accounts to be a news-checking, fact-checking account. And it was putting a tick next to everything that Boris was saying and a cross against everything that Jeremy Corbyn was saying. Is that what you cannot say? Because that is barefaced.
It's very misleading. It's very misleading. And to your point of, how the rest of advertising works in the UK, with the example of the regulator you mentioned, the Advertising Standards Authority, 2/3 of all of the complaints to them are for misleading claims. We just need to close the loophole around factual claims. Our campaign is saying, actually, it's not. We're not advocating rules around attack ads, around manifesto commitments, future promises. It's just, if you say something is a fact, something is an objective factual claim, you should have to substantiate it in the same way that you have to do for all other advertising.
OK, Matt, you're nodding. I'll come back to you in just a moment. In terms of social media companies allowing themselves to be investigated, in other words, what they claim to be transparency, and Facebook has got this Facebook library to prevent, quote, future interference in elections. Have they come to understand that they have if not a moral duty, then a certain corporate duty to protect their profits by trying to tell the truth?
I think the problem so far has been that we have deferred to social media companies to protect our democracy. So we shouldn't, in our view, expect or want executives in Silicon Valley in California to be regulating or overseeing elections here in the UK. The responsibility should lie here with us. And I think the bigger story, in the Fact Check UK Twitter account...
The one we were just talking about, the Conservative one, yeah.
The bigger story there, is that actually Twitter didn't enforce their own rules around what verified accounts can do. So verified accounts are these official accounts. They're not allowed to actually undertake misleading activities.
So the fact that they changed their name was against Twitter's rules?
Yeah, and Twitter didn't enforce their rules, which I think further underlines the fact that we shouldn't really want Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, or Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook to be the referee for our elections. We should really begin seriously after this election.
How different
to think about regulating
to make a phone campaigning, in the sense that candidates used to go round towns saying, vote for me, I can give you this, I can give you that. Is it just the scale of it?
I think it's a couple of things, actually. I think it's not as open to public scrutiny, I think, as the megaphone in the town square example. And actually you get an amplification of a sort of disinformation into a social media echo chamber of people agreeing with each other that amplifies it quite a lot, that historically you didn't have. So I think your point is perfectly right. You don't want individual media owners, which they've started to do, making up their own rules. You want uniform updating of rules for political advertising done by the government. It's actually the politicians that need to act. All this fire is being directed through to platforms. They all need to do more, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But we need the politicians to act. We need them to update the rules for political advertising.
But they're the ones who are doing it. Anyway, that's a different story. Matt, this is quite interesting, isn't it? I mean, there you are teaching the next generation of journalists, and one of the things you're telling them is that what's happening now is that political parties are cutting out the need for journalists.
Yeah, exactly. So as far as the political parties are concerned, it's clearly much better for them if they can get their message across without any form of mediation from the journalists. They don't want the journalists to put their spin on it, unless, of course, they're going to put a positive spin on it and put it in an approved way. So what they're trying to do is trying to get their message across more clearly to voters, to try to motivate them without allowing the skepticism of political journalism, without allowing the verification, fact-checking functions of political journalism to take place. So in some ways, it's more clearly propaganda being put across to voters than perhaps certainly in the UK we've been used to in the past, in that normally people would look at political claims that were coming through their door on sheets of paper, and perhaps it would just be given a cursory glance and then chucked in the bin. But most of the time, they're not going to give it much of an interrogation.
So help me with this one then. I mean, you are teaching journalists whose job it is to try and examine the truth, try and work out what is true and what is not true. If it's difficult for them, how do you teach them to do it? And if it is difficult for them, how much more difficult is it for people who aren't trained?
Well, I think clearly it is difficult for them, and as you will know, David, as a good journalist, you'll be looking for two sources on any claim in order to reach the gold standard of fact checking you would expect to achieve, or two credible sources at least. Are we doing that when we're looking at material on social media? Well, it's pretty clear we're not. The amount of interrogation that material is given before it's retweeted and shared by people on social media is pretty slim. And clearly, what drives the sharing and the virality of organic material is an emotional response. So the parties are trying to trigger an emotional response from you, from their message they're putting out. Now, that emotional response might be anger, it might be approval, it might be pride, whatever it might be, but that's what they're trying to drive to kind of get you to share that material with perhaps not a great deal of interrogation of the facts that are presented.
OK, so Alex, what we're seeing here is that we're not perhaps just being lied to, and Eric as well, but by the politicians and by their marketing companies, but we're also being lied to by the journalists who say, this is what I know, when they come to a Twitter statement without bothering to check it. We're being let down in every way, aren't we?
Yeah, I think, there's certainly argument to that, I think. But I think one of the topics we've not talked about that's really interesting is also around just ensuring that ads are transparent. So ensuring that, like in the UK, there's a political ad in a newspaper, you open it up, everyone can see it. There's a party political broadcast, everyone sees it on TV.
And it says paid for by.
And it says paid for by, yeah, it's got an imprint on it.
The ad rather than the broadcast, yeah, OK.
Yeah, in non-digital ads. But actually, there's a lot of ads that people call dark advertising because only the recipient sees it. It's not necessarily open for scrutiny to the public. And some of the tech platforms like Facebook and Google have developed their own ad libraries, but they're widely criticised. And a point that we labour is actually, for full transparency, we need an independent database of all political ads that are running during a campaign to ensure that everyone from academics to researchers to journalists can see those ads that are running, and you eliminate dark ads running during an election period. Something actually that was supported by our recommendation, was supported word for word in the fake news inquiry sort of chaired by Damien Collins.
Is
Really
there any
important point.
political party running in this general election right now that would benefit from that? Any of the major parties, or were they quite happy to bury this until afterwards?
And it's a really good point. So I think historically, one of the barriers and blockages to this has been this sort of win-at-all-costs mentality. And actually, some of the bigger parties thinking they might lose out from having the rules changed. But you know what?
They wouldn't be turkeys voting for Christmas.
Well, but actually, I think we've got to a point now where trust in politics has really sort of dropped quite a bit, and that we need to have some hygiene factors and actually just a baseline, a bit like the legal, decent, honest and truthful mantra for other advertising that governs
which is
just
part of the Advertising Standards Authority,
Yeah.
which proves itself not fit for purpose in this. But we'll leave that one out there. Are we being manipulated, Harry, in any different ways than we were before?
So I think the big difference with online targeted advertising is how micro-targeted it is based on certain characteristics. It's not a general advertising campaign like we've seen in the past, and it's also, as you mentioned, happening in the dark. So there's not enough transparency around it. So some adverts could be catered towards you and only you see it. That's a problem especially for regulators. Yeah, especially for regulators. And I think going to your previous point, I think there's a huge role for journalists in this new age. So if you think about the Keir Starmer example, every major news outlet then came out and criticised and scrutinised the decision to edit that clip. Similar with the Fact Check UK example. And any major story around fake news, there's a huge role there for journalists to give credibility towards it. So I think that should be a huge factor going forward. OK,
I'll come to you in a minute, Matt, because I'm going to be rounding this up in some ways. But I want to ask you, first of all, Alex, none of this matters if none of this works. So there is empirical evidence that these adverts influence people in a way that other ones didn't before. Is that right?
It's a very sort of dangerous road to go down, I think, because of voting being quite different to buying a product off a website, for example, or even buying a product from a shop. It's quite a dangerous road to go down. I think the argument around saying political advertising isn't effective. I think some aspects of it are probably worked up a bit too much. But often, like one of the factors, for example, that's really overlooked by a lot of the media coverage in this is that as an advertising practitioner, and that's my trade historically, the biggest factor often in a campaign's effectiveness is the message. And it's something people don't talk to enough.
Which is why Boris is just saying over and over again the same thing.
Get Brexit
oven
done.
ready, oven ready, oven ready, Brexit done, Brexit done, Brexit done. Do you, Matt, tell your pupils, the next generation of journalists, that this sort of thing is a danger to democracy or not?
Well, that's a very good question. It's the $64 million question: does all this actually work? The actual evidence that it all actually does work and is effective is pretty limited. One of the things that we do know, though, is that in 2015, the micro-targeting campaign that was run by Jim Messina, Obama's former data guru, who was working for the Conservatives then, did lead to an unexpected majority. And that is one of the things that has tended to make people feel that it is likely that this activity does produce results. The reasons why it's so hard fought in this particular election is that none of the parties they're not sure whether or not it's working, but they don't want to leave a lever unpulled that they might have been able to pull in order to achieve a result. So because of the volatility that's associated with this particular election, they're really putting all their effort into trying to achieve activity and trying to get stuff to actually happen out on the doorsteps.
OK, quick final word from you two in the studio. Matt, thank you very much indeed. If I'm a little bit worried about this, what do I do? Because I haven't got much time.
I think we need to keep up the pressure on...
Just don't believe anybody?
I would keep up the pressure on regulating social media platforms. There's a very limited window during this election, actually, to talk about these very important issues. My big fear is that after the election, we'll go back to 24/7 pure Brexit, and this will fall down the list of priorities. So I guess for our viewers, it would be to really ramp up the pressure to regulate social media platforms. Don't just think, it's Jack Dorsey's problem.
But there's going to be no
regulation
regulation brought in before December the 12th when the UK election is held, so why bother?
I don't think there's anything we can do about this election, but for future elections, I think that's the only real answer is to bring back some control to UK authorities and not just depend on executives in Silicon Valley.
And that is the point, is it, Alex, that you have to keep the pressure up for eventual change. It might not make any difference this time around, but simply saying, I'm just not going to bother with this is not a realistic answer.
I'd really agree with what you're saying. I think, and actually, I think it's wider than social media. It's actually all media needs the rules updated for outdoor billboards, through to print ads, through to leaflets as well. And the other point I'd make is actually this is an international problem. So we're talking about the UK election, but actually since starting our campaign almost 2 years ago, I've been contacted by journalists from different countries, all wanting to talk about it and understand actually how something similar could be set up as a campaign in other countries, because they all suffer from any sort of digitally mature democracy suffers from having dark advertising, for example, as an issue.
Extraordinary, isn't it? And you said the House of Lords in this country are actually taking a serious look at what you've suggested to them. Thank you very much indeed. Alex, Ariq, thank you very much indeed. Do check out the Johnson-Corbyn video. And Matt, thank you very much indeed. I think what it takes at the end of the day is an honest face to sell a message. And if your students are getting the message from you, well, I believe every word you've said. So thank you very much indeed. Lovely to see you again, old friend. And thank you very much indeed for coming into the studio. Thank you very much for watching Roundtable. From me, David Foster, from the team, thank you. See you again next time, I hope. Goodbye.